You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello and welcome to our Groundswell special episode for 2025 on Meet the Farmers. I'm Ben Eagle. Now, regenerative agriculture is a term that's become familiar in farming circles. We all know that, whether farmers choose to embrace the principles or not. But what does regenerative mean when you look beyond the farm gate? How is regeneration taking shape in the food system more broadly, and where is it heading? Now, this is a massive question, and I soon realised on having the many conversations I had at Groundswell this year that one episode will not cut it. It's something that we will return to, therefore, in future episodes. This said, I had the chance to speak with a range of people working in different corners of the food world, from retail to nutrition, supply chains and policy, and this episode presents some of those conversations. I asked each of them what regeneration means in their space and whether it's something that can go mainstream or if it will instead sideline as a niche within the wider food system. The trade stands this year were awash with organisations all banging the regenerative drum, but I wanted to seek out some of the businesses doing things a bit differently. Whisky south of the border? Well, that sounds different. I found myself in the tent of Fielden Whisky, who aim to champion what they call no-chem regen and act as a bridge between farmer and consumer by producing a direct product, whisky. I spoke to Emma Burnett, who is Senior Researcher in Agriculture and Sustainability at Fielden.
Fielden is a regeneratively produced whisky based in England. We're an English whisky, and we grow all of our own grains, which go directly into our spirits.
How important is regenerative and the sort of regenerative brand to your brand?
Regenerative's core to what we're doing. So we are doing some innovation around cereal production, particularly in the UK. We're using heritage grains and we're using what we're calling no-chem regen. So we use no agrochemicals in our systems at all. And we're working directly with the farmers to implement a methodology that allows us to produce those grains that go directly into the whisky. Regen's core to that because we don't have a certification system otherwise. This gives us a set of guidelines, and then it allows us to share that with other people and to iterate every year to make it more effective, something that people really want to implement.
Tell us a little bit about the relationship that you have with the farmers who you work with, and I'm particularly interested in, I suppose, barriers that exist when sourcing regeneratively farmed produce.
We've been really lucky with our farmers. We've had a few people who are very excited to work with us, people who are looking to make change but maybe can't afford to do it off their own backs. We've been very forthcoming with the way that we engage with our farmers. So we're not owners of land, we work directly with other people who are, and we've understood that if you don't support your farmers to make change, they often won't because they can't. So instead of buying grain on the open market, for example, and just assuming it's regenerative, or buying yield from the farmers where we're asking them to do something, but then we may or may not actually buy the output, we are renting land from them. So we are saying, hey, can you do these set of principles for us? And we will pay for the acreage. And that guarantees them enough money, enough support to run a risk. If it all goes to pot, they still get paid. If it goes better than expected, then that's wonderful. Maybe they get a bonus on top of it. But we're not asking them to take a risk off their own back. We're taking the risk. And then we're selling a premium spirit, which encapsulates all of that. It helps to pay for them to make that change.
I was interested in people's perspectives of whether regen is something that happens on farm or whether it's something that the wider supply chain can embrace. Here's Emma Burnett again.
I think one of the things that I like the most about regen ag is that it's a quite pluralist idea or set of ideas, and that can involve or integrate anyone along the supply chain, everyone from primary producers all the way through to consumers. It's really not an exclusionary set of practices, and it's not rigid. And in some ways that leaves it open to capture by anyone along the supply chain, but it also makes it open in particular to peer-to-peer learning. You see a lot of farmers who come up with hacks or things where they're like, ooh, shiny, and then they exchange that between them. And that's not top-down, that's very bottom-up. I think that's pretty wonderful.
I asked Øistein Thorsen, CEO at FAI Farms, the same question of whether regen ag is something that happens on-farm or in the wider supply chain as well.
I think regenerative is a mindset and a movement that reaches way beyond the farm. I think a lot of the movement's activities so far has been focused from the ground up, right? So it's the soil, the principles of soil health, etc. But you can equally apply those principles to how you run your slaughterhouse, how you run your logistics company, and importantly, how you run your retail or brand. You know, the principles of regenerating the resources we rely on for our business and for life in general are relevant to everybody. So I think it's very powerful within the farm gate, and it has equal opportunity outside.
Does regenerative have opportunity as a premium brand in itself, or is regenerative more about a movement like you've been saying that actually the aim should be for all farms to move in this way?
At the moment, I think there are opportunities for capturing the regenerative premium in certain niche markets. But as a general rule, I think it's the wrong playbook for this movement. I don't think we should be looking to replicate what organic has done. I think we should be looking at making regenerative farming the new conventional farming. This should be the way everybody farms. We should be farming in a way that builds soil, not destroys it. We should be farming with nature, not against nature. To me, that's the path to resilience. That's the path to a secure, food supply and food system in the future. So that should be the model. That should be the playbook in my book.
And we're at Groundswell today, and this ground is packed full of people who are either already engaging in that way, already farming that way, or who are interested. They're here, they're already engaged. How do you create a roadmap for that for farmers and others who aren't here today?
Yeah, you're right. Groundswell, I think, is for the convinced and the converted and perhaps the curious. And I think it's great to see that audience is growing year on year, right? So there's more people who are curious about this. So something is working. It's probably not where we're gonna convince the harshest critics, but might also not be where we should spend most of our resources right now. With limited resources, I think it's useful to focus on the curious, focus on those that can see the benefit to themselves of starting a small change. You don't have to transform everything tomorrow, but you can start your journey, and then keep making that kind of win-win case for farming or operating your business regeneratively. And I think that's how we build the momentum, how we build the word of mouth and the groundswell, right?
Retail, both large and small, plays a huge role in shaping food systems, and therefore it has an impact on sharing with consumers what regenerative means. The supermarkets now have regenerative on the shelf. For example, Wild Farmed now has bread and rolls in Tesco. They also have products in M&S and Waitrose and elsewhere. Other brands, such as Golden Hooves, a division of parent First Milk, champions regenerative farming in the dairy sector and is pushing its cheese products out through the independent retail market, as well as promoting on-farm milk vending machines. Beyond this, there are multiple small retailers focusing increasingly on this area. I spoke to Julia Kirby-Smith from Better Food Traders, which is a UK-wide network that supports and promotes ethical food retailers who sell locally grown food. I asked her what regenerative means for her beyond the farm gate.
Regenerative really, I think, is rooted in food production methods. Ultimately, I think the common understanding of it is to do with soil health and carbon sequestration. And, I think regenerative really still does refer to farming practices. For us at Better Food Traders, the standard we apply and that we ask our members to adhere to is actually organic. Although for smaller entities, we totally understand that certification isn't really an option at an organic level. And so we look at anyone who's dedicated to organic principles. I think regen is a bit difficult because it doesn't have that defined set of principles, or indeed the legal framework that you have with organic. Organic's legally recognised, it's decades old, it is a clear set of expectations which are meaningful for everyone in the supply chain. So it's not just about the farmer, but it's that onward journey so that wholesalers and processors and then the end consumer can all know what organic means.
I mean, with that in mind then, does regen muddy the waters then at all in terms of once it leaves the farm gate, in terms of consumer recognition, yes, but also in terms of how the messaging works up the supply chain, whereas organic is very clear cut? Can regen or should regen fit along those lines, or are we actually talking about something that's a bit broader and a bit muddier?
I think it is broader. I mean, to me, regen feels almost more like a branding exercise, and I think it's often useful to look at who's using it and why are they using it. What worries me is that you get a lot of large globalized corporations using regenerative as a term. I think because they realise that it sort of does connect with consumers. I think consumers hear it and, regenerative, it sounds positive. It's about regenerating our planet. We all know we're in a climate and nature emergency, so regeneration sounds useful and necessary. But it feels like more of a branding exercise than a sort of specific, precise, factual terminology.
I think just leading that on briefly towards certification, can you ever see, because of course if we take organic certification, it works again on all levels of the supply chain, can you see us ever moving towards a system where you have this sort of halfway house, almost regenerative certification model?
I mean, I would say I don't think a certification model would be that useful for regenerative. I think what we have with organic is the model, and that already exists. And I suppose one of the good things about regenerative in a way is that it is a bit of a broad church and it's undefined, and so perhaps you can see it as a route towards organic, or a way to bring farmers and consumers into something that is broader and less specific. I think that's one of the the upsides. The downside, however, is where people are using it without any meaning and kind of using it for their own purposes. So yeah, there's a tension there. I would say that certification on regen, really, if regen boils down to soil health and carbon as probably the two key indicators, maybe do we need another certification, or do we just need to be really transparent about those two indicators? Maybe that's what's more helpful.
Of course, we can't talk about food systems without talking about policy. Øistein is an organisation that works as an alliance of its members to champion healthy and sustainable food. I spoke to Hannah Gibbs, Programme Manager at Øistein, about Regen Ag and what it means today.
So for me, it's this kind of step away from the extractive system that we're used to, one that just takes from our supplies and doesn't renew, and instead looks at how we replenish that system. So anything that's extracted needs to be replenished, but ideally we kind of sustain as we go. So we can think of that in terms of environment and environmental extraction, the cost to the environment of anything that we're doing, but also I think with regenerative, to me, there's like a wider system implication about how people are being supported and cared for within that context, and what leadership and things like that look like. So I consider it as a kind of wider philosophy, and beyond the farm gate, a wider philosophy than just simply about the food itself.
Okay. Do you see that as a developing thing as well? Because certainly if we look at the development of this event, for example, Groundswell, and actually the subjects that it is engaged with, definitely the last couple of years, I think certainly last year saw a real step change in terms of seeing subjects like health, nutrition entering the space and being put underneath that regenerative banner still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that feels even more relevant potentially. Like that conversation about, if we start from thinking about our soils, then our soils are living things, and that transfers into our wider context and into our human health. And so I think for me, some of those conversations around nutrition are really resonating, and it's really nice to see them featuring here.
What about consumers? Do you think consumers get regen? Do you think they care?
It's a great question. One we kind of bat around a lot. I think that it sounds like a fun word, right? I think that it maybe sounds exciting to people, but I don't know that they know what it really means. It has a positive resonance because it's always been put out in those kind of positive terms. But tangibly, if you were to ask somebody what was meant by it, I think they might struggle. And I think, part of that is around how do we tell a story about regenerative, and how do we get across to people exactly what's going on when we're speaking about regenerative. And I think that's not necessarily been done very effectively. It's just been used as a bit of a buzzword to make people feel good, but there's not a lot of clarity that sits behind that for people.
How do we move beyond that though, in terms of, because certainly speaking to lots of people here today actually, and when we come up against that question, that's the bit where it feels, to me at least, that we're not quite sure how to navigate through that space at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a fair reflection. I think that we haven't found a good way of doing it, and I think that it means different things. It feels to me as though it means different things to different people, and therefore, as a result, it's very hard to tell a clear story, which is something that organic doesn't suffer from in the same way, because there's a very clear set of standards behind organic, and so people know what you mean when you say organic. So I think that's the kind of challenge that you need to overcome when it comes to regenerative.
Telling stories about regen is also implicitly linked to maintaining and sustaining trust within the supply chain. I put the question of how you do that to Øistein Thorsen.
I mean, no doubt technology will play a huge role in ensuring trust and traceability. I think it starts with, obviously it starts with the ability to tell that story and document the story and document the outcomes. So if you can quantify it, if you can be more than just a story, right? Real evidence. Then I think traceability is critical. So really knowing where things come from is the start. And then I think we are at the cusp of, we have access to multiple types of technology to help us carry that story through. But having said that, I think we need to also be we need to be real about how much of the story people have the capacity or interest in absorbing, right? I've spoken to many companies who, in the early days of QR codes on food packaging, were so excited, right? They launched their QR code with a story of the farmer where the whatever came from, and they launched it, and they watched the ticker of how many people are going to scan and find out where this cheese or where this came from, and hardly anybody scanned it. There's a power in putting a QR code on your product, because it tells the world that you're confident about the story behind my product. I stand by my product, I know where it comes from, and I know the story behind it. It doesn't mean that people are necessarily going to scan it and spend 15 minutes learning about it. So I think we're going to find more opportunities like that of sort of proxy ways of demonstrating the trust and demonstrating that what we what we say is real.
Finally, let's step into the realm of human health, because Groundswell now seems to host nearly as many speaker sessions about human health as soil health. Nutritionist Lucy Williamson is part of a growing movement linking soil health to gut health and beyond.
So what does regenerative mean in the nutrition space for you?
It's a really interesting question, and I think recently I heard somebody use a simple phrase that regenerative is just a constant improvement in a system. It really has to serve life. So in the nutrition space, a regenerative mindset, a regenerative approach is very, very new. I'm fortunate to work with some health practitioners who kind of have this approach, and literally we're thinking about how can we regenerate our health. And so for me, that sort of constant improvement is thinking about our inner ecosystem, our inner gut health. Just as there's that incredible ecosystem of microbes in the soil, we all have that inside us as well. And actually, it's really vital in our long-term health and sort of building resilience within the whole body. So again, there's so many similarities. That's what I really love between regenerative farming, where you're building resilience in a system very naturally. And that's exactly what we're doing if you approach human health via gut health. You're building resilience in the system. So, that's my take on regenerative health.
Yeah. You're mentioning gut health there. Are we generally when you're talking of regenerative nutrition, if I can even use that phrase, are we practically talking about gut health, which is, of course, in itself is something that is very topical?
So I think it's just part of it. It's my passion, so it's the first thing that always comes to mind. But I think another equally big part is in regenerating our health through regenerating nutrition. I love that term, by the way. That's a new one for me today.
You can have it.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll definitely take that. We need to think about our food differently. We need to think about the nutrients within the food and the nutrient density of that food. And, we're also aware of the reduction in these vital micronutrients in our food over the last decade. You hear huge figures like iron is 50 to 70% less in our food, and the same for many other minerals. And so actually farming regeneratively, we're starting to see science is emerging to show that these micronutrients can increase when we farm food with nature and when we restore soil health naturally. So those nutrient dense foods then can really feed and regenerate our health as well. I've seen some really interesting research actually just here at Groundswell, which shows sort of chronic conditions that we live with now, whether we're thinking of cognitive decline, Parkinson's, mental health, heart health, different cancers. At the same time that all these are constantly on the rise, the nutrient density of our food has really dropped off. So there's loads more work to do there to really understand that, but we know for sure that we need to be regenerating the nutrients in our food to regenerate our health. So really nutrient density combined with eating in a way that really nurtures our gut health, that for me is regenerating our health.
What's the extent of the research going on in this area? If you are to refresh your knowledge and keep yourself up to date, what are you reading? Where are the places that you're engaging with the research?
Oh, that's a great question. So all over. I tend to read the research directly. I sort of know the authors that I'm looking for. So, for example, in the States, Montgomery has done loads around the nutrient density of plants and how that is increased through regenerative farming. But it's also just tapping into organisations who have similar interests. Even hate to kind of rely on social media, but actually even through LinkedIn, once you start connecting with the people that you know are interested in the same areas, you start sharing papers that you might have seen. So there's no set place. I'm just always generally in touch and looking out for it, I guess.
Yeah. And what's your impression on how that information is filtering into the wider sector in terms of your colleagues and what they're picking up on?
Oh, there's a really long way to go with that, I'd say. Don't want to sound negative, but I'm freelance as a nutritionist, and a lot of my work is public facing, so I do workshops with the public on farms, and I talk about all this kind of stuff. And the problem is that a lot of this research, it takes so long to come through into actual food policy change or health policy change that it feels too long to wait. From a health point of view, so I feel really fortunate that I can actually talk to the public about this and sort of help get the information out there before it necessarily becomes taught in any way. The wonderful thing about Groundswell is that we've got farmers here, we've got health practitioners here, we've got academics here, and everyone in between, and we're all sharing this information. And that's really potentially the most important role of these events, is the information sharing and the knowledge sharing that goes on. It can't come soon enough.
So, will regeneration remain a niche movement, or is it the future of food? If there's one theme that emerged across these conversations, it's that regeneration is as much about values and relationships as it is about practices. It's about rebuilding trust between land and people, farmer and eater, retailer and community. Whether or not every farm adopts a regenerative label, the principles are starting to ripple outward into supply chains, shops, health advice and policy. There's also a growing movement, as Groundswell has attested to through the years. The question now is, how does that shift evolve? And who gets to decide what regeneration means in practice? Thank you for listening to this episode, and huge thanks also to everyone who spoke to me at Groundswell this year. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it and leave a review. It really helps in growing the show. Next time, we'll be in Texas in the US, and I'll be joined by Tyler Froberg. Until next time, though, I'm Ben Eagle, and you've been listening to Meet the Farmers.